Hello, everyone, and welcome to Grow With Us. My name is Evan Barton, and I'm your host who helps create conversations with the innovators and leaders of a growing tech center in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The Grow With Us podcast highlights the work of community leaders, tech entrepreneurs, nonprofit professionals, and talent development advocates in Tulsa. Grow With Us is a podcast of In Tulsa. In Tulsa's mission is to connect talented individuals and companies to stimulate economic growth in Tulsa and to create more prosperous communities across the region. Each episode, Grow With Us discusses the growth of opportunities, the growth of communities striving for change, or the tech and innovation that is changing the landscape of Tulsa. On this episode of Grow With Us, I speak with Cass Mitchell and Macullen Nadurak of YWCA Tulsa. We discuss the YWCA Tulsa's role in supporting refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers, how to navigate uncertainty in nonprofit and legal spaces, and where there is hope in community. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Grow With Us. I am so excited to welcome to the program today Cass Mitchell and Macullen Nadurak. Thank you so much for being here, you guys. I'm really glad to have this conversation and for you all to be on Grow With Us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and kind of jump into your story and tell us a little bit about what you do, about yourselves. And Cass, I'll just go ahead and start with you. Tell us your story in whatever way you're comfortable.
Well, I grew up on the West Coast. I moved to the South when I was about 16 years old and met all kinds of different people through that experience. And just kind of learned that I had a passion for immigration and refugee services when I went to college. I went to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville.
Awesome.
I interned with Canopy Northwest Arkansas for a semester in the fall of 2019.
Mm-hmm.
I had just studied abroad, learned Spanish, and figured I could figure out how to use that. And it turns out there aren't a lot of Spanish-speaking refugees, at least not at the time. There are now. Yeah, in Arkansas specifically.
Yeah.
But that was a really beneficial and wonderful experience. And I got to meet so many different people and just kind of learn about the different educational discrepancies and cultural differences. It was really eye-opening. And through that organization, I joined the Students for Refugees Executive Board when I was in college.
Awesome.
We spoke with Senator Bozeman just about signing the GRACE Act. This was during the first initial Trump presidency.
Okay.
He lowered the intake to a little over 11,000 people. And the GRACE Act was a request to elevate that to about 62,000.
Okay.
In 2020, actually March, legit 5 years ago today, I was in DC advocating for the GRACE Act.
Wow.
When COVID hit and everything shut down. So my career in refugee and immigration kind of went on pause after that.
Yeah.
And then, I've just kind of bebopped from different nonprofits since then. So
Awesome. No, I love that. And Macullen, I'd love to go to you, and then I'll kind of fill in some questions that I have for both of you.
Fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a non-binary trans immigration attorney in the middle of Oklahoma. So it's been a very fun ride getting to this place. I went to undergrad at Hendrix College, which is kind of where I found my passion for specifically immigration advocacy. I was in Greece when the Syrian refugee crisis kind of started, and I got to see firsthand the treatment of a lot of refugees fleeing from Syria and how a lot of European countries treated them with a lot of disdain and as if they were an inconvenience.
Yeah.
Come back to the US, and it was a very similar treatment, very similar demonization. And so kind of created a pivot point for me towards immigrant and refugee advocacy. Started working at a immigration firm out of Dallas. Was a paralegal there for a few years amidst COVID. When that started, I was also doing a lot of immigration work during the last Trump administration.
Yeah.
So fast forward 5 years now, graduated from law school, and now I'm actually an immigration attorney working on this stuff.
That's amazing. Wow. It's so interesting I like casually mentioned to you guys, I'm going to Spain in like 2 months on my first international trip. But I didn't realize like how kind of interesting that would be. I mean, it's an interesting foundation for the conversation because, like, talking about refugees, and we're talking about immigrants. I haven't even left this country, and we're talking about people that have, left their home countries to go to any place for asylum seeking or for refugee status. And so, in some ways, I have so much to learn from both of you, and I'm really excited that we're going to get to have this conversation today. But it's another thing. I have some informed experiences, but they're mostly through interpersonal relationships with others. I do feel like I've seen some firsthand treatment, not only just in the United States, but also as I've studied other countries too, about refugee status kind of being just this, I wouldn't necessarily say objectively political stance, but it is like a facet of our identities that is often contentious, and contentious when it comes to the eyes of the government. And so I think we're going to talk about it in as objective as we can, and also as like informational and factual as we can, which I really appreciate. And I think that our listeners will really enjoy that, as well as me personally, selfishly, to dive into that. But let's kind of tie Tulsa into this conversation, if you don't mind. What's been your connection to Tulsa? How did you land here? And then how has it changed over time, your conception of Tulsa? We'll go the same order, Cass, if you don't mind.
So I moved to Tulsa 3 years ago. August of 2022, I began working at the United Way. Again, just trying to kind of get my foot into the nonprofit sphere. Yeah. I knew about YWCA because of the work that I had done with Canopy, and I really wanted to continue working in refugee resettlement. So there was just more business opportunity. I was living in Fort Smith and I was running an axe throwing company.
Oh, I love that.
And doing jujitsu, and I was just kind of bored and needed
bored with axe throwing.
Yeah, I needed a new. I needed more business, and I finished my degree in international relations online, and so there isn't a lot of that going on in Fort Smith, Arkansas. Yeah. So I had the opportunity to move to Tulsa, got a job here, and ended up working at CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates, trained volunteers to help children in the child welfare system, and then got the job at YWCA and was super excited.
Awesome. So it's been 3 years in Tulsa.
3 years in Tulsa.
Awesome. And Macullen, for you?
Mine's my grandma lived in Sapulpa. So growing up, I would always come to Tulsa during like holidays and stuff. And she was also a huge influence on me politically as the survivor of a Japanese American concentration camp.
Wow. Okay.
And so my cousin, she was a graduate from TU Law and was a big proponent of it, and was also just like, hey, you can be near family. So between that and COVID, kind of creating more of a funnel for like options in terms of travel, I ended up moving here at the middle of 2021.
Okay.
And I've been here ever since.
Awesome. What do y'all think? What do you think of Tulsa?
I love Tulsa. I love Tulsa a lot. I think that this city has a really wonderful sort of cyclical philanthropy culture that's rooted in some sort of scarcity and poverty that came from the Dust Bowl. Yeah. Something about Tulsa that I, didn't really get on the West Coast or in Arkansas is there are people here who want to help.
Yeah, the connectivity.
Yeah, and people are so friendly and want to talk and get to know you in a very genuine way. Yeah. It doesn't feel like they're going to say something and then go behind your back. And that's something that I've really appreciated about the culture here.
Interesting. What about you? What do you think about? What are your thoughts on Tulsa? You can be honest.
No, I do love Tulsa. I have apprehension traveling outside of Tulsa a lot of the times.
Yeah. I second that.
But generally speaking, I do love Tulsa. I love generally just like Southern communities and pockets of more communally driven advocacy, because unfortunately, like the politicization of a lot of identities breeds an environment for like strife, and that requires community to fight it. So you tend to find a lot more beautiful and intricate and fulfilling community in spaces that are enduring a lot of strife right now.
Yeah, I love that. I think that those are things that I appreciate about Tulsa, but for kind of different ways. The connectivity is obviously one that I really enjoy, and kind of is at the basis of this podcast. Like we are really connected, and the way that you found out about what I do in some ways allowed for you to be on the show and to talk about the work that you do. And I appreciate you bringing Macullen along to be in this conversation with us. I think with Tulsa, for me, and like since being back, I'm kind of calling this my Tulsa part 2. There's probably going to be 3 and 4 and 5. But in my Tulsa part 2, I found like as an adult that like that connectivity is huge, but also just like that, like you were kind of mentioning the difference in the communities that I have had experience in being, I don't know, toxic and like full of horrible like interpersonal dynamics that like essentially plague the community in some ways that like you can't even have open conversations. I don't know. That was like some of my experience on like the East Coast and in my places that I was. And I was like, coming back to Oklahoma, I don't really like, I think that Tulsa, at least in the communities that I'm a part of, there's some shit talk and there's some gossip and things like that. But at the end of the day, I do think that we are looking after each other's well-being. Hopefully, whatever interpersonal beef you may have with someone, you're able to like at least put that aside for someone's, if someone's rights were threatened. And I think we have a good sense of when our rights are going to be threatened in this current day and age. So I'm laughing because it's too real, honestly. But I love that you guys have had experiences with Tulsa that have been obviously generally positive, but also, you're I think in a lot of ways you guys are engaging in a community and in community that needs it the most right now. So I'm really, really glad to know that that's happening.
That's really kind of you to say.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about, what you both do in your current professional ventures. I know the YWCA Tulsa is involved. What do you both do there, and kind of what's the work been looking like these days?
For sure. So I'm a part of the workforce development team. I'm the workforce development specialist. And basically what my particular job is to build a portfolio of businesses in the Tulsa area that would be interested in hiring our clientele.
Awesome.
Which is quite the ask a lot of the time. But when we have wins, the fulfillment is, there's no better hit, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I also get to be client facing. I get to sit one-on-one and face-to-face with people who are living it and really trying, and, moms, kids, dads, people who are wanting to really live out the American dream. I mean, I hate to sound so cliche and corny saying that, but they came here really wanting to make a better life for their families and are really trying to take advantage of every single opportunity. So I have a profound experience on the daily.
Yeah, I love that. I'll get back to you. I have many comments. Macullen, what about you?
So I work in our legal services department as the humanitarian staff attorney. My job has kind of changed a lot. In the past 6 months, I was kind of gap filling and doing a lot of naturalization applications for people to help kind of boost our numbers in terms of like meeting grant requirements. Since the change in administration, there's been a hard pivot to know your rights materials. And I'm still doing a lot of client facing stuff with a lot of our refugee cases that I have. But a lot of it has become trying to educate people in the community on what rights they're entitled to, what rights they need to be aware are in a precarious situation. And, the realistic way to convey those rights in a situation where you're kind of disempowered by an arresting officer or agent.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, I have things to say about both of these. I love it. Kes, you mentioned the American dream. I find that like that concept to be something that I'm weirdly patriotic about. Like, I don't know why. Like, I want everyone to have the American dream if they want it.
No, absolutely.
Like, is that crazy? Apparently, it is. But I just like I think what you're talking about. Like, yeah, that is for many people the basis of their their refugee status or just entirely their immigrant status is that the promise and the opportunity that has been shown to them, maybe through propaganda, but also maybe through what actually does happen for many, many people here, is that you can achieve the American dream, which is freedom from certain things,
certain oppressors,
obviously, whilst gaining others. Like there's a trade-off is essentially what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
But I found that the American dream is fleeting, not only for refugees and immigrants, but also for Americans.
Mm-hmm.
So, to hold on to it, it's something that I'm finding myself uniting with other people on in an interesting way. And that kind of gets me to know your rights, because I think that there's something so American about knowing your rights, because they are constantly changing, but in some ways, they have almost always been laid out before us in what has been promised to us. And so it is also our right to educate ourselves about our rights. And so I along those lines, I've been volunteering with I'm going to try and say this the way that it is, because it's a little confusing. The Human Rights Campaign has a committee at the city level that is a 2S LGBT committee. And I am serving as the vice chair on that committee now. And we did a Know Your Rights event in January at the Centennial Park. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I had the flu that week. So months of planning, or really like weeks of planning.
I did.
Was that the one that you presented at?
Yeah. I didn't present. I was just I tabled at that event.
Awesome. Tabling. I was like, I know we had reached out to people for tabling. So
inappropriate vocabulary on my end.
Yeah, there's a difference between tabling.
Obviously.
I did not present.
But I mean, the importance of those events obviously comes down to just like knowing your civil liberties, but also like you mentioned, knowing what to say when an oppressing officer or someone is confronting you with their interpretation of the law or certain policies that have been enacted yesterday, which is kind of how I feel things are going right now. But it's extremely important, and I love that your background is really like rooted in the legal practice, because it's something that I feel like is extremely mystified for us lay people sometimes, to not know what our rights are, or to not even know where to find out what our rights are. So to have people like you educating the community, it's extremely empowering. So I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Well, I want to move on to kind of like the big topic that we want to talk about today is kind of like, who is this population of folks in Tulsa that you all are serving on the refugee and immigration side? We've got a lot of terms here. There's refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers. Do you mind kind of spelling out the key differences between these identifiers and how those folks interact with your all services?
I'm going to leave that to the legal expert.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's a little bit of a squares and rectangles kind of thing. I mean, both asylum seekers and refugees are a type of immigrant. Refugees, that requires an application through the UN Human Rights Council, and through that you apply to the UN, have them review the likelihood of your being oppressed or experiencing persecution. They give a decision, and then that gets forwarded to the United States government, who then, in theory, agrees to help with resettlement processes, as well as like hooking people up with employment and things like that once they actually get stateside. Asylum seekers, on the other hand, are people who have to be in the United States to apply. Mm-hmm. So they're people who are already here and are or have fled some form of persecution. That can be anything from you spoke out against a local gang and the police are unlikely or unwilling to protect you. And so now you're unable to internally relocate in the country of origin. Yeah. And so you come to the United States and you make your case. Or it can be something like someone who's from Afghanistan, who has been in the United States for a few years now, and they are westernized to the point that their political ideology, even if they may not have that political ideology, is imposed upon them by merit of them being westernized.
Gotcha.
And so now they have to stay here in the United States to avoid persecution from the Taliban if they're returned home.
Yeah.
And then immigrant is going to be the just general catch-all term for people who are trying to seek some form of relief to stay here in the United States, whether temporarily or permanently. Then you also have undocumented immigrants, which is a very nebulous term that has a constantly shifting and changing perspectives based on who has power. But generally, undocumented immigrant is going to be someone who entered the United States through a border without inspection, like Customs and Border Patrol didn't pick them up. And so now they're availing themselves to the government in some way, shape, or form, or they're not, and they're trying to remain hidden amidst increasingly deportation-motivated government.
Gotcha. Okay. So an interesting thing, I don't know if I mentioned to you all before this podcast recording, but in Tulsa actually has a visa network where we help candidates.
I work with you guys.
Okay, yep. Familiar. Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha. I was like, I know that this is the overlapping circle in a lot of the things. And so, I imagine that when I'm looking at what in Tulsa Visa Network does, legal assistance, job placement, relocation support, housing and resettlement.
Absolutely.
All four of those things kind of also are applied to the populations that you serve. I know in Tulsa has a little bit of a slight workforce angle on it with the full stack web development and kind of this tech talent thing. But when it comes to those things, that's where there is overlapping circle. And I appreciate you lining out those key differences, because it is language that I feel like becomes entirely nebulous sometimes when these terms feel politically charged. And I want to encourage people to not conflate these terms to be politically charged, because it really is essentially just a moniker for a way that someone can receive, or I guess not receive, services. Mm-hmm. And, in the United States, I think that immigration is like this hot, what would you call it earlier? Hot button issue.
Hot button issue.
It's a hot button issue. But we can still talk about it and have a conversation about it. And I don't want anyone to feel like you can't have these conversations if they come from a general knowledge seeking perspective, because it is helpful to know what, not only other people, it's helpful to know what your status is. It's helpful to know what other people's statuses are when it comes to this stuff, so that you can be more sensitive and be in community with that person.
For sure.
You might be the connection that person needs to a key and vital resource. And if you are unfamiliar with the distinction between their statuses, you might not be able to provide that connection for them. So moving on to the next question, unless you had anything to add on to that.
Maybe something worth noting, for instance, talking about the nebulousness of an undocumented immigrant, you have that term thrown around a lot. For instance, Cubans who sought humanitarian parole upon entry have been now called publicly undocumented because they didn't enter right, but there was a process and program in front of them that they did adequately engage with.
That has been instilled for decades.
Which they've been rug pulled. And so now they're being called undocumented, even though they did enter with inspection. They were paroled in by the US government, just a different administration.
Yeah.
So that's just one example of undocumented becoming just a gray, fuzzy area to use to demonize others.
I do appreciate that example, because we do need concrete examples of what is something and what isn't something when we're talking about something as sensitive as this, which I really appreciate. And so as an organization at the YWCA, you all onboard and receive groups of refugees in the Tulsa area and support them with social services and workforce connections, in your case, Cuss. So can you explain a little bit more about that, what that process looks like from onboarding to continued support?
Well, it's going to look different for the both of us.
Absolutely.
That said, for my part and for my department, we sit down with a refugee one-on-one. We get a referral or we do an intake, right? And so these clients are coming from a different organization. We have Catholic Charities, the synagogue, and Rising Villages, which is a newer one. They help with the first 90 days. And then they get passed off to YWCA. YWCA is technically a social services program, which is why we ended up not receiving a cease and desist letter.
Yay!
We got to continue our work and continue our outreach. And so we sit down, we get to talk with our clients face to face, kind of understand, what's your work history, what's your education, what's your language, what are we doing, what are you looking for? And from there, we'll reschedule them to come in for a one-on-one where we create a resume and try to see if any of our partner companies have any job openings that would be comparable to their work experience. My team also has a credential list, like a professional credentialist evaluator, who is able to take people's degrees from other countries and basically like dub them or find a comparable one in the United States.
That's awesome.
Which is really cool and really beneficial and has helped so many people get employed in the U.S.
Absolutely. I want to touch on that really quick before switching over to Macullen, but the one-on-one support with the intake, I bet, is really probably where you feel like that meaningfulness of the role comes into play. But also like you are in that role being this intermediary between a person who's never been to this place before and what is their future essentially here. It's the workforce connections. It's the finding the resources to put food on their table. And also I'm imagining also like establishing a short-term or long-term residence as well. And so these are huge, huge services. And, I think that when we're talking about who all comes to mind when you're having those one-on-one services, you're thinking about completely different sectors sometimes. You're thinking about housing providers. You're thinking about the workforce development, like local employers that have those openings. That is an important factor to call out because I do think that the business sector, not only in Tulsa, but entirely in the United States, needs to realize that there's some corporate responsibility in this entire process. Becoming I guess being educated on that might feel, like I said, these feel like political terms, but at the end of the day, it is about your workforce. It is about who is going to help your company continue to do the work that they do. And that might require the skills of a refugee. And that refugee might bring a skill set to your company that you've never had before.
Absolutely.
And so it's just, without saying the words, I'm saying the words of what we all, I think, have really kind of understood of like what diversity means to the workplace and its importance in, I think actually like making a difference in someone's life and the company's bottom line. So
I agree.
I find that really interesting. And then the last thing was the degree compatibility. That one is crazy to me because like for education to be this like the direction that everyone gets pointed in when it comes to bettering themselves in their future, for you to have a degree and for some institution to say that degree is not enough. So how are these institutions not peers in this? Just because of the national origin of these institutions? I find that really baffling and very, very frustrating for many people. I had my Spanish professor on the podcast a couple of months ago, I think last year, and he was telling me that he had pursued a bachelor's degree in his home country, and we moved to Oklahoma. None of his credits transferred. And that degree was not honored in the same way as it was in his home country. And I find that like extremely disheartening and just very frustrating. In his case, he started over. And the sacrifice that it must take to realize that you have to start over is probably a lot. And I know I'm speaking from more of a sympathetic than an empathetic perspective because it's not an experience that I've had, but I'm sure I could go move to another country and then be like, your degree from Dartmouth doesn't mean anything. And I would be like, thank you I would thank them. I would be like, yeah, this is what that experience must feel like in America, where I'm supposed to be able to have this American dream, taking it back to that. I don't know. These are my ramblings.
No, for sure. And if you don't mind, I'd actually like to elaborate on a couple of things. So you mentioned housing, and I get to talk about workforce and Macullen gets to talk about the legal side of everything because that's what our tangible and hands-on experiences are from the day-to-day.
Yeah.
But YWCA is expanded past that. So we do have like a housing section and we do have a healthcare section and we do have an education section. So there are resources beyond what Macullen and I provide that do try to acknowledge where those barriers are going to be. And that's kind of the point of all of it, is to eliminate as many barriers as possible so that they can have a little bit more smooth sailing in the integrative process.
Yeah.
I guess,
A
for lack of a better
holistic
word.
integrative process.
for sure.
I love it. Maybe we just coined a new term.
Write that down.
But yeah, Macullen, let's get to you and kind of your process with onboarding a family or an individual and the continued support beyond that.
Yeah, so we kind of pick up where our case management department kind of lets off. They do a lot of the like signing people up for SNAP and for Sooner Care, maybe applying for driver's licenses, stuff like that. We also have a department that specifically educates people in driving. But then they kind of just get transferred over to us, to the legal department to specifically fill out if they are paroled, their work authorization documents, which is different than a green card.
Yes.
And it's also not a work visa. That's a different term entirely as well.
Absolutely. See, I am familiar with those.
Right. But we help people get their work authorization a lot of the times, or their permanent residency in the case of like refugees, because refugees, generally speaking, upon entry within a year of arriving in the United States, are eligible to adjust to a green card, lawful permanent residency. We also have people who are paroled in as Cubans, and if they are in deportation proceedings, I think it's for over a year, I want to say, under the Cuban Adjustment Act, they are also allowed to adjust for a green card while they are still in deportation proceedings.
Interesting.
And then we also have, we have naturalization applications and DACA, who we also typically will receive through our case management department. But naturalization is one of the few where it's kind of not as insular as the other forms of adjustment, because we advertise it more to the public.
Gotcha. So remind me, maybe just on a baseline level, a family is not really told where they're going to go if they are being relocated to the United States, but they are relocated to Tulsa.
Right.
And then when they get here, they are essentially told or advised to come speak with you all and other supporting organizations, right? Is that kind of how the intake actually starts, if in some ways? Okay.
Yeah. So there are trying to like linearly think about it. So like the first 90 days that they're here, they're going to be within like what do they call it?
A resettlement agency.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a resettlement agency. Thank you.
Which has been very much just completely like stifled recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's been a lot of just we don't have people coming in anymore.
Yeah.
So.
But you all have experience of it working.
Yeah. When it works,
Absolutely.
it works fairly well.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then after the 90 days, once they kind of get set up with the initial, like, okay, maybe they got a PCP now, right?
Yeah.
And they got their kids in school, or they know where their kids are going to need to be enrolled.
Yeah.
We take care of them for the next 5 years. And the goal ultimately is that a family or an individual is self-sufficient. So it's always a really good day when you get an email that says so-and-so achieved self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
Because that means that they have their green cards and they're not a client of ours anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting. So we've kind of hinted at this slightly larger conversation here, but just we are recognizing the moment in time that we are in. This is a not a live podcast, but this is a podcast filmed in real time. And we are in March 2025 right now. And so with the change of federal administration, there often comes lots of restructuring and the stance of an organization as they begin to enact policy. This often affects organizations like the YWCA. Can you all share how you've been navigating this shift and still providing your services as an organization? Let's go in the same order. You can talk a little bit about the workforce piece first, Cass, and then we'll switch over to kind of the legal side with Macullen.
Well, I know that I've had a lot of pretty radical changes in terms of I grew gray hair the first 2 weeks after the inauguration.
And a day after your 26th birthday, not to dox you.
That's what I'm saying. Thank you. Yeah. But it's been surprisingly hopeful.
Yeah.
Which is very difficult to say because there have also been mass layoffs of people where it's like, it's crazy that everybody with the last name Gonzalez doesn't get to work there anymore.
Yeah.
Why'd you do that? Can I call you and talk to you about it?
Yeah, I just saw that they laid off people at the National Weather Service today.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah. So that's the thing is that, I could sit here and talk about multiple businesses, and we could get to the point where we're not even counting it on our fingers anymore.
Yeah.
But everything is impacting everyone. And we're all trying to navigate it. And for the most part, I find that our clients are so proactive and so prepared and so just like, okay, so what's the next step? And ready to go and like, no, so I have these skills and I know I have these skills because I've been doing this thing for 5 years. Yeah. Call somebody and tell them that I can do it. And I've had a lot of success with that. It's definitely a lot more conscious and intentional effort when it comes to where we're applying and who I'm going to go and talk to and have my big ask, right? And what that ask sounds like now.
Yeah.
Taking a lot of the demographic conversation out of the conversation itself, ensuring the safety of people and, just in the general office environment,
morale is waning and waxing.
It's better than it has been, but it's definitely like our doors are locked.
Yeah.
And we have doorbells now. So,
which I should say that is specifically a legal maneuver so that we can create a safer space in our waiting rooms for clients so that we can keep ICE agents and stuff like that out because they would need a warrant to enter our premises if the door is locked.
Yeah. Legally.
This legal.
We love legalese. It helps.
See, I left it at ominous. And Macullen had the nuance.
No, I love it. And for you, kind of what's obviously, I think that something that is worth noting here is the difference between legislation, executive order, and perceived policy.
Yeah.
I think that might be something that would be helpful to kind of like outline how you're navigating that in your space.
Yeah, it's kind of a picking and choosing your battles and conversations with either clients or colleagues because there's a lot of nuance and backstory that goes into explaining like why a law operates the way it does. Something worth noting, and it's something you'll hear a lot, is that executive orders are not law. And that is important to know. The problem is that if everyone believes that it's law in the system that we're working within, does it matter that it's not actually law? That kind of is up to, I guess, whether a court stands up for something or blocks something. But the unfortunate reality of any court block is its inevitable destination is Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of things become we're stifling an unfortunate like blood flow.
And it becomes a years-long process as opposed to a week to week or month to month.
Right.
Yeah.
So it is on the one hand a great thing that like lower courts are blocking things and are standing up for the rule of law in an environment where the law seems to be very precariously perched and the judicial branch especially seems to be in jeopardy. But it's a good thing because a battle that could be decided with zero resistance in the matter of weeks is now going to be prolonged for years, months, until the court can make a decision on an issue.
Yeah.
The other thing worth noting is, like, especially with recent developments in the news, you have a real threat of like availability of certain rights for immigrants. We, in theory, everyone present in the United States should have the same application of our rights in the Constitution.
Absolutely.
And that's especially true for green card holders and lawful permanent residents. But we're seeing that a student got targeted as opposing and obstructing, and I think espionage is now another claim that they're levying against him as a charge of inadmissibility, which can affect someone even if they are a green card holder. And that person is now going to have to defend themselves in a deportation proceeding.
Yeah.
And it's fundamentally a First Amendment right issue. The right to protest is ingrained and instilled in the First Amendment.
Yeah.
And it is afforded to immigrants, generally speaking. And so me as a practitioner, it becomes educating people not just on their rights, but the strength of their rights and the precariousness of their situation when faced with an oppressive police force or ICE agent or someone who really just likes the power that they get to wield against others.
Yeah.
And it becomes it's the same discussion that a lot of people have to have with their kids in terms of like their first interaction with the police.
Yeah.
And racial disparities in terms of application of law. It extends to immigrants as well. In theory, we all have a First Amendment right. Whether or not a police officer recognizes that right is a completely different question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to go back to one of those points, kind of about like whether an executive order is law, is kind of this like what I have seen or have heard through grapevines is that essentially organizations or institutions of organizations have started to be anticipatory of future executive orders and have already started to change policy around that. And I just find that really interesting because, like, again, if you go back to like what you just said, it's not a law. Like, it's not a law yet. Like, but for us to really upend like everything that has been the way that it has been out of the not fear, but just like the promise is really interesting and probably so difficult to navigate in a professional space because you're trying not to give anyone this false sense of security, but you are trying to give them practical, advice might not even be the right word, just like practical application of information. And so, I just find that really interesting and absolutely a space for nonprofits are like running around trying to figure out what to do.
What's really interesting is because our clients and the people who are being victimized by this stuff the most are coming from different countries, a lot of the concepts aren't familiar to them, right? And so not only are we now having to say, okay, well, this is how our entire government system works. This is how it wants to oppress you.
Yeah.
This is how it wants to be vindictive, and it's hard to explain that to somebody and to be like, hey, like, you need to have your employment verification card like on you at all times at this point. You can't just like, oh, I lost my social security. You don't get to do that anymore. No. Like, you guys gotta, keep it together and really stay on top of it because it's not as secure as it may feel because we're smiling and telling you the information.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. The way that, No, that's a really good point. I kind of want to put a button on this conversation, going back to the hopefulness that you said you've been feeling. Tell me a little bit more about that? What does hope feel like? No, I'm joking. But like, I would love to share kind of like, what do you feel like has been the hope that's come from this? Has it been the strength of community that you've seen? Has it been community partners actually standing up?
Ooh.
Has it been
I'm gonna have to take a couple deep ones before I answer that, because I'm an emotional person and I'll just start crying. So,
no, that's okay. Absolutely. And I'm not trying to.
No, I know. But
as comfortable as you are.
Three people who three faces popped into my head that I've had the opportunity to speak to. And, again, daily I get these profound experiences, and it just shapes everything in the way that you talk to people. And I don't know, on the daily, you hear the first world problem kind of stuff, and you're just like, cool.
Yeah.
I talked to 3 people today, and if I told you their story, you would never ever complain again, But the hopefulness side of things, one, I know that we're all very thankful that we're still employed.
Mm-hmm.
And that has changed how we interact with each other in the office setting and the office morale, for one. I know that my boss and I definitely are able to have very candid conversations. In fact, my whole team, I feel, I've grown closer to them, and we've been able to have a lot more candid conversations. Our CEO really stepped up and put her foot down on a lot of really wonderful things that, made us as queer individuals feel a lot more welcome in our space, as well as knowing that, like, our colleagues are going to be held to that same standard, but that they as well are safe. It was a really good environment shift. And then on top of that, with clients in particular, people are still getting jobs.
Yeah.
People are still getting green cards. People are still but like the conversations are still being had, the efforts are still being there. And even though these pathways are being presented, these obstructions on these pathways are being presented, it's more like a fork in the road at this point rather than a blockage. And they're trying to make it a blockage. I'm not trying to say that that's not happening, but the stuff that felt like was never going to be accessible again is still rolling and is still tangible. And that gives me hope. And that's wonderful. And then, the fact that there are federal judges that are putting stops on things and speaking up and going, hey man, come on. Like, I know you want that.
Yeah.
But there's a couple more steps that you got to do to get there. And I don't know how far that's going to go.
Yeah.
It's just, I'm such an act local, think global person.
Yeah.
And that is something that, really got ingrained into me 5 or 6 years ago when I started this work. And I feel that has really become the method of practice now, and that a lot of people are becoming a lot more conscious of local politics and local conversations, because that's where you're going to see the work get done, and you're going to see improvement. And I'm not just saying see, I'm saying like you're actually going to tangibly see it. You're going to feel it. You're going to experience it in a way that is, you're not going to see it on CNN, but you're going to be able to know that, like, hey, you hired somebody who is a very, very vulnerable population right now. Somebody got approved while all of the cards are stacked against them.
Yeah. And the impact that has on their family.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I love that. What about you? Is there any hope in the legal sense of things?
So I will say I'm on my own journey of trying to discover hope amidst a very chaotic field. But something that I try to remind myself is that we are not standing on like new ground.
Yeah.
We are just standing in like a similar path to the path against oppression, path for liberation. That our like ancestors have like had to walk through, queer ancestors, ancestors of color, things of that. Like this is not a new fight. It's just a new face for our enemy in terms of combating a kind of a bombardment of very like dismal pieces of news. And I think it's important to, like act local, in the sense that like look around you and see the other people fighting for it. It's not a worthless cause.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
quite the opposite. It's an important cause because if we don't fight for it, then people are going to like fall by the wayside, and a lot of people are going to suffer.
Yeah.
So it is impossible to truly give yourself over to like despair, because to do that is an insult to the people you're fighting for.
No, I love the way you frame that. And I think you guys are spot on. And, the whole act global. No, I'm going to.
You got it. No, you got it.
This.
It's, hold on.
I see
my brain is actually breaking. Act local, think global.
You got it.
Boom. There we
Way to
go. I think it's really important to act local and think global. And it really is like that way that we can build community around it. And how there is still a light at the end of the tunnel when there's many people around you, and the outcomes are people's livelihoods. And I don't know. I just find that this time for me has been really important to not be insular, to not think that if it's not affecting me, it's not affecting me.
Absolutely.
It is affecting me because I care about other people. So I am just like really grateful that we had this conversation. I'm hopeful because we have this conversation. I'm hopeful that we've had a conversation about this on a platform that I feel like is going to reach people and maybe give them some language, or maybe open up a conversation about a topic that some people might find real uncomfortable. But I can't say you shouldn't. I want to just encourage you to maybe try engaging in difficult conversations, because that is oftentimes where you find a common ground, or at least a common direction in channeling your emotions that might be affecting you at this time. So, with that being said, we're at the end of the episode. I just want to say thank you so much, Cass, and thank you so much, Macullen, for your insights, for your information. Anything else that you want to wrap up with? Maybe some opportunities to get involved with your organization on a local level, if there are any. What are some ways that our listeners or other people can support you all?
I do know that interest in volunteerism after a lot of the executive orders were signed increased. I unfortunately don't know off the top of my head, but I do know that, places like Catholic Charities have a lot of really, really fantastic onboarding volunteerism things. You can help people by, driving them to doctor's appointments at the very least, things like that. And to add to that, I kind of wanted to, elaborate on something that you had mentioned before we wrapped up. But if you, on top of having the conversations, on top of gaining knowledge and staying informed, having an interest in something, let that guide you to action. Yeah. It's one thing to have conversations in the social sphere and with your families. That is radical movement. That's great. Those things need to happen too. But put your time where your mouth is, and put your actions where your mouth is.
Absolutely. I love it.
I know that YWCA is looking for volunteers. I know that the legal department is wanting to start using more volunteers to help us like with applications and stuff and mass being submitted. And on the topic of like having conversations and stuff, we are entering a period where like there's a lot of bunkering happening. There's a lot of people who like don't feel safe to have conversations because for valid reasons. There might be like there might be lashing out. There might be all sorts of things, but if we let people who have views that are potentially contrary to ours sequester themselves and bunker away, then they will just become a more extreme version of it on the back end. And so these hard conversations are important to keep up, because otherwise extremism is just going to flourish in like kind of the dark corners of the internet and in our families.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
I remembered where you can volunteer. You can get on our website and there's a Get Involved tab on the YWCATulsa.org website.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, Evan.
Thank you
so much.
Oh my gosh. Thank you both so much. And thank you so much for listening to this episode of Grow With Us. Thank you for listening to this episode of Grow With Us. Grow With Us is supported by In Tulsa Initiatives. If you're interested in learning more about Intulsa services for job placement and workforce development, please visit talent.intulsa.com. From there, you can join our talent network where you'll get access to our newsletter, and our talent team will make sure we put the right opportunities on your radar. We put the choice to pursue a new career and opportunities in your hands. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to be notified when more episodes of Grow With Us are released. Let us know what you think about how we're doing by rating and reviewing. It really helps. Grow With Us is edited and engineered by Rant9 Productions and Jesse Ulrich. This has been Grow With Us.